I shake my head sometimes at the everyday stuff we used to see and do. Bad sun angle? Need a better vantage point for your movies of Lake Superior and Ishpeming Elko RS3s? No problem, we'll just stand on top of these loads. Yep, this works. Hello friends, KillerBee here. Do you think train watching today is kind of, well, lame? As someone who grew up in the 1960s and 70s, I think it is. Even though I missed Steam, I feel that I caught the end of the golden years of being a rail fan. Hanging out in the vestibule, locomotive cab rides, caboose rides, even gondola rides. If you are younger than 50, you probably missed all this. Skeptical? Here, let me show you. For context, I grew up near Detroit and had a grandfather that took me around to the yards and on trips. Pictures and movies here are mostly a mix of his and mine. When I was 7, he gave me a Kodak Instamatic camera, which took square photos and occasionally even yielded some decent shots. There was also slide film for it. So let's turn the clock back and get started. For one thing, there were more railroads then. In the Detroit area, I initially had the Pennsylvania, New York Central, Baltimore and Ohio, Chesapeake and Ohio, Norfolk and Western, Grand Trunk Western, Detroit, Toledo and Ironton, Detroit and Toledo Shoreline, Detroit Terminal, Delray Connecting, Wyandotte Terminal, and Wyandotte Southern. Just across the river was Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, and Essex Terminal. Elsewhere, the Rock Island and Milwaukee Road were still at full mileage. And out east, Conrail didn't form until 1976. We had railroad-operated passenger trains to watch and ride until Amtrak was created in 1971. After then, you could go over to Canada and catch the end of CN and CP's operations as they morphed into VIA. The equipment in use then had Dutch doors, which I made ample usage of. Yeah, I just took this as a suggestion. In hindsight, even the startup of Amtrak presented opportunities we didn't appreciate then. Nearby in Chicago, the railroads were still operating their own commuter services. Employees were a lot more approachable and cooperative with requests. It didn't take much for a gentleman taking his 6-year-old grandson for a ride on a Canadian Pacific RDC from Detroit to London, Ontario, to wiggle them up into the cab. "Hey kid, wanna blow the horn?" And sometimes they would even stop and offer a photo op. Also, when I was 6, my grandfather signed a waiver with New York Central, and we had the run of the property in Detroit for a week. I just never understood why he had to pick the middle of winter. The CN Spadina Avenue Roundhouse foreman in Toronto allowed you to sign a waiver, grab a hard hat, and wander the site to your heart's content. I found the same setup at the Delaware and Hudson facility at Whitehall, New York. I remember just agonizing whether paying the $5 he wanted was worth it. I viewed it as extortion, but I paid it, and it was well worth it. You had open stations with agents. I spent 2 weeks each summer in Cadillac, Michigan, visiting my other grandparents. I got to know Jim Jones, the Ann Arbor Railroad freight agent/operator. He allowed me to take about 10 years of train orders and station records that had accumulated upstairs in the freight house over the years. Imagine the surprise on my parents' face when they picked me up to go home, and I had in tow a large garbage bag full of bundles of train orders. Train order operation was still the practice, and I started collecting them. You could try your luck at the locomotive facilities, asking if you could go through the engines looking for train orders left behind. The CN in Windsor, and the C&O at Rougemere were pretty accommodating. This was taken when the hostler at Lane Yard in Toledo on the shoreline let me check the units. Otherwise, we didn't think anything of just wandering through the engine facilities looking for interesting stuff. One popular stop was N&W's Oakwood Yard at Melvindale, hoping to see Western Maryland run-through power, but not to diminish the units that came in from the west. Also, the N&W F units that were captive to Canada required the occasional trip over the river to Windsor. On New Year's, when everything was quiet, a friend and I would go up to Pontiac Roundhouse and take night shots, complete with setting off multiple flash for each shot. Not a soul around. We would do the same thing in Windsor, but there we would ask first, as workers were around. No one ever said no. It was super easy to go back and forth to and from Canada then. Just a question or two at the border, and you were on your way. You could wander around yards then too, within reason. I also collected employee timetables, and getting the latest copy was always easy. The N&W Yardmaster at Oakwood Yard, the CP operator at Windsor, the CN General Yardmaster. I had my peeps. And if you couldn't see someone in person, you could just write. I would ask my parents for postage stamps for Christmas. Paperwork, train lists for the train crews, hard copy, handwritten switch lists, train orders, lineups, waybills. Some railroads sold their surplus documents and artifacts. The CP and Chessie did this for a number of years. Railroads put out maps, and some would alter geography to give themselves an arrow straight main line. Smaller lines could make themselves appear as a critical link in the transcontinental rail system. Booklets were published to acquaint the public with their network and to use for management recruiting. Railroads in these pre-Staggers days created and promoted service offerings. Services and even individual trains had names, such as N&W's Apollo, seen coming through Hammond, Indiana. Freight schedules were published. New facilities were publicized. It was a colorful time. Everybody had employee magazines. You could stand ridiculously close to trains. I guess as long as you didn't get hit, all was good. Not only were hump yards more plentiful, but they were still being built. The railroads were also still having cars built and painted up nice. Graffiti was non-existent. New 86-foot high-cube boxcars for a still vibrant Detroit auto industry were plentiful. Remember the flashy short-line cars? And there were the legacy roads and oddball cars running around. Railroads owned piggyback trailers, and for that matter, intermodal meant trailers, no containers yet. Auto frames, open auto racks, saddlebacks. Cars had neat stenciling, and AEI labels. Railroads had cool emblems, even the smaller roads. Who thought I would miss the Pac-Man? But the Penn Central mating worms, not so much. Crews used hand signals. There were cabooses on the rear of trains. Car ferries. My Florida East Coast had blue engines. I miss Penn Central. Not. There was the Roosevelt Road overpass in Chicago, spanning the tracks into Union, Grand Central, LaSalle Street, and Dearborn stations, and the support facilities. Stations were still prevalent, providing a place you could hang out trackside. Same with the larger stations. No one bothered you. Marginal Class 1 branch lines in the pre-Staggers days. Interesting operations were still in place if you made the effort, such as CN's narrow gauge in Newfoundland, or the U.S. Steel operation in Wyoming, or Union Pacific's DD-40Xs. Switch lamps and lanterns for tail-end markers. Entire subdivisions were still signaled with semaphores, and each railroad had their own style of signals. Just first and second generation locomotives existed then, with the production of 5 builders still active, and all their cool sights and sounds. If you made audio recordings, the horns were better and had more variety then, and engineers could kind of play with them. Although I never thought I would say this, sometimes I even miss the monotone horns. There was heavy-duty electric freight operations still around, and the 1976 bicentennial painted engines and equipment. Interesting motive power still. Sperry Rail Service had actual rail cars. Trains really flew then. There weren't event recorders in locomotives, and radaring wasn't too prevalent. It was downhill through Birmingham. Track speed was 60, and the eastbounds really rolled. I mean, the cars were literally a blur. Mix it with jointed rail, and you had a real cacophony of noise. The CN passenger trains out of Windsor regularly ran at 90 plus miles per hour, even though the timetable track speed was 80. Interlocking towers were still common. You didn't think anything about just marching up the stairs and dropping in. Here is Harry Vaughan and Romulus Tower, where the N&W and C&O crossed. And you had crossing towers too. Which brings up what was probably the best part of back then: accommodating employees. Not that today's don't want to be, but they can't. Technically, they shouldn't even have been so accommodating back then either, but it was a different time. From hanging around the GTW Birmingham station, I got to know a lot of the line-side employees. Frank Pemberton was a conductor that took me under his wing, so to speak. He was on the local freight that switched to Birmingham and slipped me a lot of rides. Also a regular on the local was Bill Olnick. The engineer on the day switch engine at Ferndale Yard, Jack Ellison, would always let me ride with him when I dropped by. Big regret, I never thought to snap his picture. After SEMTA took over funding of the GTW commuter trains, they tried a Birmingham turn out of Detroit in the afternoon. I got to know Mr. Kuniaz, who would allow me a trip to Detroit and back whenever I asked. John Down, a Battle Creek conductor who came through 3 evenings a week, would save his train orders and train lists for me and throw them off when he saw me waiting trackside. Norm Allison was the station agent. Mike Glum was the Royal Oak section gang foreman who I worked for one summer. Chuck Galetsky became a resume reference for me when I graduated from college and looked for a railroad position. Jim Raines and Bob Anderson, Detroit road trainmen. Jim Harper, Ferndale second trick yardmaster. Signal maintainer Jim Burkhart. I could go on. And I got to know a CN passenger engineer out of Windsor who would always accommodate me up front, Jim Ryan. "Hey kid, want to blow the horn?" Yardmasters and train dispatchers were shown in the phone book. I could call the GTW dispatcher in Pontiac if a passing train had a problem. He would answer and would contact the train on the radio to relay my observation. Line-side train dispatcher phone boxes were still in place. You could listen in on the dispatcher line if you had a switch key. When I was 12, my grandfather and I were wandering around the C&O Rushmere yard. Our yard engine and caboose were idling a few tracks over. One of the guys in the caboose yelled for me to come over and told me to go on top of the caboose and take a picture. This was one of the few times I was actually hesitant, but I followed through. I was 13 or so when we made a stop at Michigan City, Indiana to see the South Shore Line. My dad popped his head into the headquarters building and asked if we could take pictures. Sure, the guy said, "Just let me tell the train dispatcher you guys will be out in the yard." One time in spring of 1974, a friend and I talked my mom into driving us down to Ferndale Yard. The yardmaster knew us and tipped us off that train 451 would be using the center track at Birmingham on account of a dimensional shipment, which meant he would have to stop. It was a big gamble, but we cut my mom loose to go home and hoped the crew would let us ride with them. They did. I miss steam, but the mainline steam excursions were still pretty prevalent. You could ride in a gondola, rain or shine. Imagine even suggesting this today. And it was okay then to go check out the engine, even if you were in the way, or swarm the train when it rolled in. Train wreck happen in your town? Go check it out. Get in the way. It's all good. I've seen shots by others of people climbing all around on the wrecks. You could just wander into offices. No one ever ran you out. If anything, they would ask if you needed help, assuming you had a purpose for being there, even if you were a teenager. You could get summer jobs. In the summer of 1979, I easily picked up a track job for the summer with the GTW, worked on a production tie gang for 2 weeks, then successfully bid onto the Royal Oak section gang for the rest of the summer. Okay, do you believe me now about being a rail fan in the 1960s and 70s? And I will concede, there are a few things today that were not around then, like rail cams, digital cameras, scanners, camera phones, drones, the internet, ATCS until it wasn't. But you know, these are all enhancements to the process, not the actual subject matter itself. And as they say, you don't miss something until it is too late. What I would give to see again what was just everyday stuff back then. Here, take a look. See what I mean? This was all just common stuff that you saw every day back then. So be your own judge, as I am obviously biased, but the 1960s and 70s were a good time to be a rail fan. Everything that was a daily occurrence then is like, wow, today. And yes, I know those that came of age in the 1940s and 50s will chime in, as is their prerogative. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this. Here, you can subscribe and link to another video. Thank you. Bye for now.